So you have your sewing machine, your fabric, and your pattern, and now you may be wondering, where do I even begin? So in today's video, I'm going to talk about how to get started on your project by cutting your fabrics. If you've been following along with our 30-day Learn to Sew challenge, I'm Jess, and welcome to video number 13 of this series. If you're just joining in and you missed my previous videos on how to choose fabric, how to prepare your fabric, and how to read sewing patterns, you will want to watch those before you start cutting out your fabrics for essential tips before you get started. I've added links below this video to all of those videos so you can get caught up in the series. If you're ready, then let's dive on in. There are 3 common ways that fabrics are normally cut. The first way is with a rotary cutter, a ruler, and a cutting mat. The second way is to use a pair of scissors and cut out pattern pieces using the paper patterns included in your pattern. And lastly, you may need to cut out your pieces using acrylic templates. And that's common for quilt patterns. Not all quilt patterns, but some specific designs require a template to go in addition with the pattern itself. At the beginning of patterns, you'll find a list of pieces that you need to cut. Any rectangular pieces in your pattern are usually easiest to rotary cut. Simply lay a single layer of fabric on your cutting mat with the selvage horizontal to the bottom of the mat, and align the long edge of your ruler along the mat measurement you want to cut. And place your hand firmly on the center of the ruler to hold it in place, and spread your fingers, curling them a bit to hold the ruler securely. You roll a rotary cutter from the bottom to the top along the ruler's right edge. So align the ruler at the bottom edge and press down firmly and roll up to the top, keeping the blade against the edge of the ruler to cut. I'm just using a small quilting ruler. There are all kinds of sizes of rulers available, and you can adjust your piece to cut the next measurement as you go and continue cutting your pieces that way. A few additional tips when using a rotary cutter are to always roll the rotary cutter away from your body. Follow any safety guidelines that came with your cutter. Never use a rotary cutter on any surface other than a rotary mat. Flat, crisp fabrics are easier to rotary cut, so it's always best to press your fabrics with an iron before cutting, and you can even use a spray starch to help make the fabric stiffer. Attaching gripping tabs to the bottom of rotary rulers to help keep them from slipping on your fabric is helpful. A variety of gripping tabs are available at your local fabric shops, including clear grippers, so that way they won't obstruct your view while cutting. And my last tip is to always close the rotary cutter and engage the safety guard when you're not using it. For cutting with scissors, use a sharp pair of sewing shears. So specifically look for fabric scissors. Do not use just any old regular pair of scissors, and you'll want to make long, smooth cuts. And the same goes if you're using a pair of pinking shears, which are scissors with a jagged zigzag edge. And pinking shears are super helpful to cut fabrics that have edges that tend to fray, or along the curved edges to help reduce some of the bulk. If you're cutting notches or clipping corners or edges, you'll want to use a pair of small sewing scissors. If you're using a pattern that has paper pattern pieces, you can either trace each piece directly onto your fabric and cut with a pair of scissors, or you could pin or use pattern weights to hold the pattern piece down onto your fabric and just cut directly along the outer edge with your scissors to save time from tracing. If you decide to trace your pattern pieces, cut on the inside of the marked line. You don't want to cut along the outside or even along the center of the line, because the line itself will add a little bit of width to the piece itself, so your pieces will be slightly larger and construction might not go as smoothly. Most paper patterns have arrows printed on them, which indicate the direction of grain line. So the arrow tells you which way to position your pattern pieces in relation to the lengthwise straight grain, which is the line that is parallel to the selvage. For cutting pieces out with acrylic templates, there are a few things to keep in mind. Depending on the shape and the size of the templates, you may be able to have the template on top of your fabric and use a rotary cutter to directly cut around the template itself. Rotating cutting mats are super helpful if you're using a rotary cutter with acrylic templates. So it is a cutting mat on a base that you're able to hold down the template, cut, and rotate the mat without moving your fabric or the template. If you decide to first mark the outer edges and then cut with the scissors, that is another option as well. It just takes a little bit more time. Rotary cutting is the more accurate and quicker option, but beginners might be more comfortable marking and then cutting with the scissors. Next, you'll also want to pay attention to whether or not your templates are symmetrical. So that will determine whether or not you position them a certain way depending on the direction of the print of your fabric. There are a few additional cutting tips that I want to share with you. Notice which side is the right side and the wrong side, meaning the front and back of the fabric. Some fabrics might look the same on both sides, so decide which side you want to be the right side. Pay attention to which direction the fabric design is when you're cutting your pieces to make sure it's facing the way you want it to. Notice if the direction of the grain line, bias, or stretch is important when cutting your pieces. Make sure your cutting surface is flat and high enough to not strain your back and shoulders while cutting. Make sure your cutting tools are very sharp for frustration-free cutting. This was definitely a ton of information to take in. So if you need to, feel free to refer back to this video or print off the free guide sheet that I put in the link below, so that way when you're ready to cut out your project, you have these helpful tips with you. We have now made it through all of the foundational videos of our 30-day Learn to Sew challenge, and tomorrow we're gonna start stitching on our very first project. So join me on our YouTube channel where we're gonna make DIY checkerboard coasters. It's a beginner-friendly pattern that I think you're gonna love. These coasters are so cute, simple, and make great gifts. They're perfect for practicing cutting, straight stitching, layering fabrics, and using some new handy notions. I hope to see you then.